talks back. I grew up a farmer. My animals never talked back to me. They just gave out love all the time. They were just there. I had a couple Jersey cows in my days of being a dairy farmer, and they would, I'd go out there, 4 o'clock in the morning. There was always one or two that would come right up to me and wait for their hug. They needed their hug first thing in the morning. I'd give them their hug, and I'd reach around their head and pat them on the cheek and say good morning, and then they'd follow me. I'd go the whole way up around the barnyard and bring all the cows in to milk, all 185 of them or whatever, and they would stay right by my side. I'd walk them. I'd hold on to their collar. They had a leather collar, leather or some kind of material, and they'd walk right beside me like a little puppy dog, and they were my friends, and I miss them. That's the part I miss about farming, my animals. And the nice thing is, like I said, they never talked back to me. They just gave out love. I was just saying to somebody the other day, yesterday, there's only a small percentage of our communication that is actually verbal. And I met with a client the other day, and my partner was there in the front seat, and the client was going to get in the back seat, and she was standing there, and I looked at her, I pointed to her, and I went like that. She knew it was time to get in the car, and she got in the car, and that's when I said, a lot of our communication is nonverbal. I just pointed at her, and then I went like that to the seat. She came over and sat down. I wanted to talk this morning about being fruitful. Growing up as a farmer, I remember the old fruit trees in the orchard where our hogs would be. We grew hogs, and we had dairy. And one of the things that I really enjoyed growing up was watching how God kept everything going so that there would always be enough. There was always, you plant one seed of corn and you'd get maybe 2 ears, and you'd have hundreds of seeds from that one seed that you would plant. And I watched reproduction in the animals. I watched how a mother pig, which is called a sow, I watched how that all happened. I'd watch the little piggies, and I'd watch them being born. I was just a little squirt, but I learned about reproduction. I learned about farming and the excitement of farming. I knew as a little boy that I just wanted to be a farmer because it was so exciting, because everything was always multiplying. And God designed this earth to be, there's no shortages with God. There's always an abundance of everything. There's enough food in this world to feed everybody. No kid should be going to bed hungry at night because there's plenty of food to go around. So let me get started. I want to go back to Genesis 1:28, where God had created Adam and Eve. And after he had created them, and Adam had this new woman in his life, well, the only woman. I often wondered, God took one of Adam's ribs and made Eve. And I often wondered, after the more women in the world and everything, I wonder if Eve ever counted Adam's ribs. That'd be one way of telling if there's any other women out there, if God was going to make any more. Just fun stuff I think about sometimes. My mind doesn't stop. I want to go back to these pigs. I loved my pigs as a boy growing up. I just loved. Daddy left me have, I think I had 1 or 2 sows of my own that I could call mine. And I remember just a little squirt going out there into it was kind of like any place where you have pigs having babies, they farrow, okay? And so it was called like a farrowing house. And we had these places where the sows would go in, and across the corner of the pen, we had 2 planks, one down about, maybe a foot off the floor, and then another one up, maybe a foot above that one, 2 planks. That was so the sow couldn't get back in that little corner, and we'd have a heat lamp back there. And the little pigs like to be warm, so they'd go back there and they'd pop up like little sardines, and they love each other dearly. Pigs are very loving and kind. And anyhow, I remember walking up. Tim the Toolman, okay? You remember his neighbor, Mr. Wilson? Remember he'd stick his nose out over the top of the fence like this, and he'd be talking. You couldn't see his mouth. You could just see his eyes, basically, and maybe his nose. And I remember as a little boy, I can remember this like it was yesterday, being out there in the farrowing house, and the partition was about this high so the pigs couldn't get out. And I remember going up the fence, putting my hands up there and sticking my nose up over and watching these little pigs. They were so much fun to watch. And I got to tell you this because most people don't know this, but as a little boy growing up on the farm, I saw this all happen. When a little pig is born, they have this instinct. They know so much about life when they're born. They know that they are going to be the cleanest animal on the farm. When you hear somebody say dirty as a pig, that's just wrong. They don't know about pigs, or they wouldn't say that. Pigs are the cleanest little creatures on the face of the earth. If you give them half a chance, they will be clean. And the only reason they won't be clean is if it's real hot out in the summertime. And you have to know this. Pigs don't have sweat glands like people do or any other animals do. So the only way they can be cool is to get damp and let the air blow over them and cool them off. And you can kill a pig by spraying water on them in the hot summertime. You can just kill them because they can't take that. You can't just spray cold water on them. They have to the water has to evaporate. You can get away with misting them, putting some mist there, spraying up in the air and just let them mist. But if you hit them with a hose, you can actually kill them if they're really hot. Anyhow, they understand cleanliness when they come out of the womb. And I just want to tell you this. When they're born, one of the first things they have to do is they got to go pee, okay? But before they do that, when they're born, the table is set, okay? And they each have a place setting. And they come out of there and they shake it off a little bit, and next thing they're up to the table and they're eating. And they have this pecking order. There's Boss Pig. He's probably the biggest one, and he usually takes over 2 place settings right off the bat. The one at the bottom of the list is probably a runt, if there are any runts, and he gets what's left. But the Boss Pig will have 2 place settings, and to the pig, when he walks up to the table, he sees this. He sees 2 place settings, one here, and he sees one here. And he's here, and he's having lunch or breakfast, whatever time of day it is when he was born, and when it slows down over here, he's over here. And when they let go of this one and go to this one, if another pig takes over, he's in for trouble. Because the Boss Pig will swing his head like that, and each one is born with 2 tusks here, 2 tusks here, 2 here, and 2 here. They have 8 tusks, and they're about 3/8 of an inch long, and they're sharp as razors, sharp as needles, razors, whatever. And he will swing his face, and he'll go like that and slap the other pig in the face and bare his lip and rip his face. So a pig farmer, one of the first things he has to do is take each one of those little pigs, and you use a little side cutter, pliers, a real sharp side cutter, and you lay the pig on your knee. You sit down, lay the pig on your knee, and you pull his lip back, and you go nip, nip. I don't think it hurts really bad, but you have to do it. If you don't, in a few hours, all the little pigs, their faces will be like mincemeat. They'll just shred each other's faces because they're fighting over their place settings. They got to, and so he's, but here's the cute thing. Almost nobody knows this unless you're a pig farmer. One of the first things they do once they get their first meal, they leave the place setting that's there, and they leave and they go up to Mummy's nose. Okay, Mummy's laying there on her side nursing these pigs, and you'll see them one at a time. They'll go up to Mummy's nose, and they'll go right up to her face, right up to her nose, and they'll make this little sound. It sounds something like this. Not quite that loud. It's just and the mother pig recognizes what they're saying. Excuse me. I've been around long enough. I know what they're saying. Mommy, I have to go pee. Is that okay? And she says, yes, make sure you go to the furthest corner of this pen. And that little pig will, and then the mother, she'll boof at them, boof, boof. And then they don't say oink in case you wanted to know. It's not oink, it's and mother boofs at them, and then they go trotting over to the furthest corner of the pen. If it's a foot further to that corner than it is to this corner, they know that. They go as far away as possible from their nest and from where they eat. They don't want any filth around them, so they go as far as they can. And you'll see them, little sow pig will squat down, pee a little bit, and then she'll come back. And then she has to be reaffirmed in what she did, this little pig, and she comes back to Mom's nose and, oh, I'm all happy, Mommy, I pee. And see, and the mom boofs at them, and, oh, that's wonderful. You did great, little pig. And so they run back to their place setting and eat some more. They'll have lots of meals a day. They're eating all the time. They eat and sleep, eat and sleep, eat and sleep. So I enjoyed watching this, and I can still remember, it's kind of funny, but it's the truth. I remember it like it happened yesterday. I was standing with my nose out over the partition. I was only about maybe 5 years old, and I was looking out over like Mr. Wilson, and And these little pigs were just having supper. I mean, they were into their meal. And my daddy said to me, he said, do you know why they like that so much? And I said, no, why? He said, because that's chocolate milk in there. And see, you got to remember, when I was a kid, you hardly ever had chocolate milk. We had sugar milk because we didn't have Nestle Quick back then. We didn't have all the fancy stuff. So you'd put a spoonful of sugar in your milk and you stir that up and you'd have your sugar milk. And so chocolate milk was something that, you'd almost die for, and said, that's chocolate milk. Now, we both knew, he knew and I knew that wasn't true, but we laughed. I mean, I was just a little squirt. I knew better. I knew what was in there. I knew it was just regular milk. It might have been a little bit sweet. Mother's milks are usually a little sweeter than pasteurized milk, stuff like that. But anyhow, so they'd get permission. They'd go pee. They'd come back and get reaffirmed in what they did. And the rest of their lives, they lived a clean life. Cleanest animal on the farm. One of the best pets you can ever have is a pig. They make some of the best friends. Sugar milk, when we were kids, we played. We didn't sit around and go like this all day long or watch TV all day long and change the stations. We played. We played hard. When we get to the end of the day, we were tired because we played hard. We'd ride bike. We'd play whatever. We played cow. We'd get under the table. The table was our barn. Get a cut of raisins in your mouth and lay there and chew like an old cow. We could imitate almost any of the animals, and we'd play cow. And we get tired of that, we'd go play with our trucks and stuff. We'd call it trucks and stuff. We'd get our toys out and we'd play, pretend we're farming, and farming was in our blood. And it was so much fun growing up on the farm. It was work. We had to work. From the time when I was a little boy, I had to help with the milking. I might have only been 5, 6 years old, but I'd help my daddy, and he'd praise me. He'd just praise me for carrying the milk over to the milk house in a bucket. And he'd only put maybe that much milk in the bucket. He'd kind of gauge it as to how strong I was. But I would pick it up with both hands, and I would go like this with this bucket of milk, and I'd get to the milk house, and I'd pour it in. I'd come back and get some more. He'd pour some more in out of the bucket that was sitting there. And I could keep up with my dad carrying the milk a little bit at a time. And I got strong, and I learned to appreciate the animals and watch the reproduction. Their instinct was to be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. And so that's what they did. I have to think, I mentioned that God created the earth and he created abundance. He created so much abundance that we never have to worry about having enough to eat. He would supply our needs according to his riches and glory through Christ Jesus our Lord. Everything was made to be plenty of everything. We'll never have to run out of anything. There's plenty of energy. I remember when Jimmy Carter was our president, we had this energy crisis. There was no energy crisis. There was plenty of energy. It was a crisis in man's mind, in his heart, that we don't have enough energy. There was plenty there. Do you know that the power from the sun, 1 hour, or I think it was 1 day of the sun's power is enough to energize the whole earth for a year. Just 1 day's worth of sun. Well, there's enough energy there to do everything we do on earth for a whole year. That's how much energy is just in the sun. Then we have magnetic energy. They have generators right now. They're not on the market because big oil and a lot of big corporations are suppressing it. But they have I've seen them. I've seen pictures of them. They're it's like a big wheel about 4 feet high, and it has magnets on it, and it has a little battery sitting beside it because it needs a little bit. It's almost perpetual energy. That thing, once you start up, it'll sit there and just run, and there's enough power coming off that to energize your whole house, air conditioning, heat, whatever you need electricity for, your oven, your stove, everything, and it'll just sit there and run. And their idea was to put it in every home in America and not charge for them. All they wanted. We all know that it wouldn't happen to every home, but as many people that wanted it, they wouldn't charge for it. That all they wanted was the money from the extra energy that you didn't use from that machine that you sold to the power company. That's all they wanted. So that's just 2 forms of energy. We have oil, we have air power, we have big windmills, we have solar power, we have all these things that God provided for us, and there's always enough. And when I think of always enough, those 2 words remind me of a book I read by Heidi Baker. Some of you know Heidi and Roland Baker. And she wrote a book, Always Enough. And she talks in that book of how in Mozambique, where they're missionaries, she and her husband, many times they wouldn't have enough food for all these little orphans they were working with. And there might have been 150 orphans, and all they had was a little handful of meal. And they would pray over their food, and the Lord would multiply it, and everybody would eat. And she would pray for people. That apparently there were a lot of blind people and a lot of deaf people in Mozambique. And they would come to her for prayer. And she had like a 99% success rate with blindness and deafness. But before she'd pray for anybody, she'd call in the kids. Because do you ever notice that kids have tremendous faith? And when God is your only answer, you know, they don't have plan B over there. If God doesn't heal you, they don't have some surgeon or some doctor or whoever they can go to. They don't have plan B. So this little kid's faith is really powerful. And so she'd call the kids in, and then she'd ask the townspeople that were there, is this woman in fact deaf? And once they said yes, she's been deaf all of her life or whatever, then she would have the little kids come up and pray for these people, and they would be healed. 99% of the time, they'd receive their hearing, they'd receive their sight, and it was just beautiful. And so the whole concept, a friend of mine, some of you might know her, Lisa Hicks, she was in Guatemala or somewhere, and all the townspeople were there, and they were going to feed everybody, and they had this one pot of soup or porridge or whatever they called it. And as they would get down towards the bottom, so far off the bottom, this pot right in front of everybody's eyes would just fill right back up. And they'd keep serving the people, and it would fill right back up. And, you know, that's normal Christian living. That's the way Jesus did it. You know, he had 3 loaves and 2 fishes, and he fed 5,000 men. There was probably another 10,000 women and children, at least, I would think, and fed them all from 3 loaves and 2 fishes. And so that's how God operates. He can make something out of nothing. He can take a penny. I saw him take a penny and turn it into $1,000 one night. I gave a singer at the barn. It's Singing in the Barn. Some of you have heard of Singing in the Barn. This guy was going to be coming the next weekend, and I talked to him. I said, you're coming, and you offered to come without any pay, drive all the way from Nashville to come to the barn, and you're offering to come without any pay. And I said, the only money I have on me right now, I just want to pray over this. I had a penny in my pocket. I picked it up off the ground somewhere. And I said, I have this penny, and I want to give it to you, but I want to pray for it before I give it to you. So we prayed. We stood there in the parking lot of a church that he was singing at, and we prayed over this penny, and I asked the Lord to just multiply it, however much he wanted to multiply it. Make a long story short, he was at the barn that next Saturday night, and he sang. And the people came to his product table. He sang one song that they really liked. And he called me the next Sunday morning. That was Saturday night. Sunday morning he called me. I was just getting ready for church. He called and he said, Harold, you're not going to believe this. Remember that penny? I said, yeah. He said, they came and bought $1,000 worth of that CD with that song on. And he said, and he drove back. He was on his way back to Nashville, driving Sunday morning, going right back to Nashville. And he was just so blessed from that. God multiplies. He doesn't know about division. He knows about multiplication. And you plant a seed of corn, and you'll get more seeds of corn. You raise some pigs, and that mother pig's going to have maybe 8 or 10 pigs, and she does it twice a year. And it's multiplication. It's bearing fruit. These animals know about bearing fruit. You know, it's part of their instinct. They know how to bear fruit. So I grew up with seeds, seed time and harvest. And God said to Adam and Eve, subdue and multiply the earth. There will be plenty for everyone. We also, one of the other things we did, we bred cattle dogs. And how many of you know that they're taking little boys' names and calling little girls by boys' names? When I was a little boy, Terry was a boy's name. Now Terry is a girl's name. I can't wait till somebody calls their little kid Harold, their little girl. I'm waiting for that day because they do it all the time. Well, our mother dog that was the mother of all these babies, she had, I think it was 80 or 84 babies for us, and they went all over the country. These cattle dogs, people would come and get them, but Laddie was the mother. How she got the name Laddie, I don't know. Her name should have been Lassie. She was a collie, and anyhow, she was probably the smartest dog I've ever known in all my life. My mother had a heart condition. And she couldn't run and stuff, but one day she realized the one pen of hogs was loose. They got the gate open. There was like 50 fat market hogs ready for market, like 230, 250 pounds. They got the gate open, and they were running all over the farm. She's home by herself. What in the world is she going to do? She called Laddie. Laddie come running, and Laddie knew exactly what to do. She knew where those pigs were supposed to be, and now, you got to remember, a pig, if they think that you want them to go to the left, they'll go to the right. If they think you want them to go that way, they'll go that way. And they just, it's like, sometimes it's almost like they got the devil in them from when they jumped off the cliff and went into the lake. It was like they had the devil in them then, and it seems like they do now. They can get really cantankerous. And so Laddie knew what to do, and she started circling back and forth, started bringing them in, getting them together, and they'll kind of run. If they're all scattered around, they'll start running for each other, and she was going back and forth and nipping at their heels, just getting them going, and she kept back and forth, and she kept working right in towards this hog barn, and the gate was open. My mother's standing here watching all this, and Laddie just kept them going. She finally got them up to the gate, and she kept back and forth and back and forth. She got them right in the pen, back in the pen, all by herself. My mom's just standing there watching. And she got them all in the pen. My mother walked up, closed the gate, and latched it. That was Laddie. And she reproduced. She knew about being fruitful and multiplying and replenishing the earth. And she has offspring all over the country today. That was back in the 60s, I would say, 60s or 70s. And those people found out about Laddie, and they'd want her offspring, and they turned out to be wonderful cattle dogs. The New Living Translation says in Genesis that we would be masters over all life, animals, birds, fish. King James says have dominion over all living things. So here was Laddie having these babies, 80-some in her lifetime that she produced. And I have to tell you this. All of a sudden one day, Laddie was getting old, and she just disappeared. And we didn't know what happened to her. She didn't act sick or anything, but her time came, and we didn't know it. But she walked out into the middle of a hay field. The hay was probably this high, 2.5 feet high probably, the alfalfa. And she just laid down, and I guess she went to heaven. Randy Alcorn has a book called Heaven, and he seems to think that in heaven, lots of our pets, some of our animals, there's going to be animals there, maybe. He doesn't have proof, but there are things in the Bible that he shares that maybe. If you have a pet that you lost, yeah. So, anyhow, in my late teens, some of my friends that we ice skated together came to me. They knew I could play guitar, play bass and stuff, and they said, why don't you come join us? We're starting a group. So we started a group that's called The Relationship, and it was based on the fact that we should have a relationship with Jesus is what counts. You can have religion, and it won't get you to heaven. You can walk in a church, and it'll make you a Christian, just like walking in your garage makes you a car. Get my cars and cows mixed up. It makes you a car. That's how much sense it makes. Religion just won't cut it. And so our group was called Relationship, and I played in this gospel band. We had the whole works. We were kind of on the cutting edge. We were known as the rebellious ones, I guess, because back then at our church we didn't have musical instruments in our church. It was wrong to have a piano or an organ or anything. And so we had guitars, we had bass guitars, we had lead guitars, we had rhythm guitars, we had drums, all that stuff. And we were really, in their opinion, worldly. And we got to sing every weekend, and we'd be out sometimes Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon, Sunday evenings. I remember 5 times a weekend sometimes we sang. And I wouldn't be in church on Sunday morning, and this kind of bothered them. I was the song leader, and they'd get upset if I wasn't there. And so they were pretty critical of us kids. We were in our late teens, early 20s, and we were out just spreading the gospel everywhere we could go. If they would have invited us to a bar room, we'd have been in the bar room singing and telling them about Jesus. That's just how we went anywhere. We went to county fairs. We went all over the place. Anyhow, we had this notion that we were supposed to be fruitful. and to multiply and replenish the earth. Now, what do you do if you're a peach tree? What are you going to do? You're going to reproduce peaches. If you're an apple tree, you're going to produce apples. And if you're, a fig tree, you'll reproduce figs. And so if we were Christians, what are we going to do? We're going to reproduce Christians. And we didn't see a lot of that happening in our church. It was a lot of legalism and everything, and there was a lot of things that were more important than going out and evangelizing. In fact, they didn't believe in evangelization at the church I went to. They said, they had home missions, which we take care of ourselves. It was kind of a greedy kind of a thing where I grew up. I still appreciate my heritage, though. If I hadn't been raised in such a strict environment, I might be some hellion out here running around. I might be something opposite from heaven's angels. Might have been somebody other's angels. I don't know what I'd be today if I hadn't had my heritage. So I want you to know I appreciate my heritage. But anyhow, Jesus said, if you don't bear fruit, he used fruit as the example. If you don't bear fruit, we're going to cut you down, throw you into the fire. And so it's very important that we bear fruit. And when he said be fruitful, when God said be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth, it wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. You, be fruitful, multiply, replenish the earth. And the same way in the spiritual realm, we need to be fruitful. We need to share the gospel every time we get a chance. And so that's what we were doing. We were going out. We'd see more people get saved on a weekend than we saw all year at our church. But they were criticizing us. We weren't in church on Sunday morning. And it was kind of hard to swallow, but we did. We kept it up for years and years. Up and down the East Coast we'd go just singing. And I remember one weekend we were at a little mission church in Atlanta, Georgia singing. It was just a new mission church. They just started, a little Mennonite church. And we were there, and I'll never forget when we got finished. I remember it was Sunday night. We were there Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, I think, if I remember right. And no, it couldn't have been, because till we got off work and got down there, it had to be Saturday night, Saturday and Sunday night. Anyhow, we gave an invitation at the end of the program, and I'll never forget. There was like 4 or 5 people came up and gave their hearts to the Lord. But the one little girl was a little blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl, cutest little thing you ever did see. And she was probably 4 or 5 years old. And she came up and knelt down and gave her heart to the Lord. And then out of the vestibule or the narthex or something in this little church, the doors come flying open. Here come this young man. I'm going to say he was probably about 21. He had blonde hair. It was like shoulder length. Very handsome kid. Come running up the center aisle, just sobbing, just crying. You could hear him just sobbing out loud. And he got to the front of the church, and he just dropped on the floor in front of the altar there, and he was just sobbing. So we dismissed the service, and we got all these people to go with us back. There's a back room there where we could have some privacy and talk to these people. And I remember, I'll never forget till the day I die. I'll remember this forever, because we're going to all live forever. And that little girl got down on her knees beside me, or I get down on my knees beside her. And I led her in the sinner's prayer, and she just gave her, it was just so touching just to watch this little girl at such a tender age give her heart to Jesus. Well, this young fella with the blonde hair, he started telling us his story. That Sunday afternoon in Atlanta, Georgia, he was on the highest bridge. He chose the highest bridge in Atlanta, Georgia, and he was going to jump off and graduate. Yeah, he was done with life. And he got to that bridge, and he tried to jump off. He tried and tried and tried. He just couldn't jump off. Somehow he found that little mission church in the center of Atlanta somewhere. He found that little place, come in, heard the gospel message, and gave his heart to the Lord. He knew that was his answer, and he gave his heart to the Lord that night. And I'll never forget that. We traveled all night that Sunday night. We left the church there maybe 10:30, 11 o'clock, and we drove all night. We pulled into Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, about 6:30 Monday morning. The guys changed their clothes and went to work. It was just, that's the kind of, we did that. I don't know if I could do that now. I'd have to have extra strength from the Lord to run like we ran back there. But people were getting saved. We were seeing some fruit from the ministry. And we were heeding the call, the command to be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. And not only physically, but spiritually. Well, anyhow, my wife was a Messiah College student, and I didn't even know anything about her. My sister did. My younger sister Faye knew Karen, my wife, but Faye and I went to a concert in the Eisenhower Center at Messiah College one night. This was back in the 70s, about 73 or 4, and we went to hear Andre Crouch and the Disciples. They were at Messiah College. Some of you know some of his songs. How can I say thanks for the things you've done for me? And why me, Lord? That wasn't Andre Crouch. That was, what's his name? But anyhow, we went to hear him. And after it was over, this nice young lady come running up to my sister and hi Faye, and all excited. And then my sister introduced her to me. It was Karen, my wife, today. I didn't know she was going to be my wife. I just met her. I'd never seen her before. She lived 10 to 15 minutes up the road from me, but I never met her. But she was friends with my sister. And so we talked a little bit. Then we went out to my car, and on the way across, we were walking across the parking lot, and all of a sudden I stopped right in my tracks. And I looked at my sister Faye, and I said, Faye, you're not going to believe this. Last night, I think it was the night before or 2 nights before, but I believe it was the night before, I was 36, 37, 38 years ago. I said to my sister Faye, you're not going to believe this. I just dreamed about her, this Karen that you just introduced me. In my dream, it only lasted a couple seconds. I dreamed that I was walking up this wooded path, a lane, gravel lane, holding this girl's hand. And the dream lasted, I don't know, it might only last a couple seconds. All I remember is seeing her, walking with her, holding her hand as I walked, and that was the end of my dream. And all of a sudden, I realized that was the girl that was in my dream. I had this little sneak preview before I ever even met her. And we just stood there and looked at each other like, how can that be? But we serve a wonderful God. He has all kinds of little tricks up his sleeve to make life exciting. And I love serving our God. He's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of Israel. Elohim is another word for God. It's like, wow, we serve a tremendous God. Anyhow, we dated, we got married, and right after we started dating, this thing about being fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth, God was telling couples, he meant that for people that were married, like a man and woman to be married. Not the other way around, not 2 men, 2 women, but a man and woman to be married and be fruitful, multiply, and replenish the earth. So we're dating, and, sometimes when you're dating, you get a little frisky, and everything. Well, we got to the point where we were getting into a little bit of frisky, and so we stopped, and we said, look, we don't believe in premarital sex. God is against that, and he wants us to be fruitful, multiply, and replenish the earth after we're married. Okay, so we agreed together. We were sitting there on the couch. We said, we're not doing that. And we made a pact that we would not do that until we were married. And we weren't even talking about marriage yet. We just said, if we're going to get married, then it would be okay, but not now. Okay, so that's what we did. And so we kept our promise. And so later on after we were married, we ended up being youth leaders at our church. And we both taught in the youth group Sunday school. We taught Sunday school. Every time we had a new group in the fall, I'd get them on this. I'd tell them. I seemed like we'd rotate. There were different teachers that would teach. And when it seemed like I always got to teach the morning. The subject was premarital sex. So, because we had to teach that in church, teach the kids that this is not something for you to do. And if you have done it, I'd tell them, look, if you have done it, God can forgive you. Just ask for forgiveness. And you can go back to being, in God's sight, not in man's sight maybe, but in God's sight, you can go back to being a virgin. Because you'll be that completely forgiven by God. And I'd comfort the ones that had already done that, and I'd say, look, God loves you so much, and he will forgive you, and you can be clean in his sight. And anyhow, every new group that would come in, I'd tell them, when I started teaching this lesson, I'd say, no, I just want you to know up front that I never kissed my wife until after we were married. And they'd look at me like, what kind of kook are you? You never kissed your wife until you were married? I said, yeah, no, I never kissed my wife until after we were married. And then they'd just look at me. I'd say, I never kissed my wife until after we were married. And it took them a while, but finally I'd say, well, she wasn't my wife until after we were married. I kissed my girlfriend. I kissed her time and time again before we were married, but I didn't kiss my wife until after we were married. And I'd get them every time. It was fun. Get them caught them off guard. And one Sunday morning, it was that subject that every year at some point that subject came up, premarital sex. And so we had a college professor from Messiah College. Her name was Ruth Doherty. I had her come in to teach the whole youth group. We had every now and then we'd have the whole youth group get together. Instead of going into the individual little classes, we had them all together, and the subject was premarital sex. And Ruth Doherty, I introduced her, and you know how kids are, teenagers, and they just the whole time, and you're up there talking, and so finally I introduced Ruth Doherty, and they're still, and she stood up and she said, "This morning we're going to talk about sex." Back then you didn't say that word in church. And she said, "This morning we're going to talk about sex." And all of a sudden, and it was like you could have heard a pin drop. Boy, they were all ears. And boy, she taught that Sunday morning about premarital sex, and she talked about the sin that it is. And anyhow, I remember these exact words that she said when she concluded her message that morning. She said, "If there is a meeting of the bodies before there's a meeting of the minds, there probably will never, ever be a meeting of the minds." If your relationship is all about physical and your bodies and all the excitement of that, and you don't ever sit still long enough to talk about the things of God and about life and about your goals in life and your walk with the Lord. My wife and me was sitting on the couch, and we'd talk for hours. I'd ask her questions. She'd ask me questions. "Well, what do you think about this in the Bible? How about that? And how about this?" And we talked for hours on end. And it was what we needed to do to find out where we were in our lives, in our spiritual walk. And so that's what we did. But later on, we decided to bear fruit. We have 2 sons and a daughter. Our oldest son just got back from Taiwan. He's a missionary over there. He and his wife and the boys. And our second son is 31. Brent, the oldest one, is 34. Our next one's 31. And the one that's 31 has Down syndrome. And he still lives with us. And then our daughter, who's 28, lives in Knoxville, Tennessee. She hasn't been fruitful yet and multiplied and replenished the earth. Our oldest son has. And so, I have to think of Abraham and how God said, "I'm going to, you hearken unto me and do what I say." And he took him out and showed him the night sky, and he said, your offspring will be like the stars of the sky. And then later on, he took him out on the beach and said, "Let's see all this sand," or wherever the sand was. Could have been in the desert. And he said, "Your offspring's going to be like the sand of the sea." And so I always think, how in the world could you have that? Well, when God multiplies, he multiplies exponentially. And some of you probably heard this little story. Would you come to work for me for $100,000 for 1 month? You have to work every day of the month. I'll start you off at a penny the first day, and I'll double it the next day, and I'll double that the next day. You can do that, or you can work for me for $100,000 for the month. Which would you take? Almost everybody jumps at the $100,000 in 1 month. Are you kidding me? I'll take the $100,000. Well, to make a long story short, if you do a penny and double it for 31 days, it comes out, when you add it all up at the end of the month, it comes out to just a little over $20 million. That's how exponentially we can multiply as Christians, even just biological growth. But if we go out, I heard a little thing one time, if everyone won, what great numbers would be won when each one of us had won one. Each one had won one. That's so true. And it will grow. We can reach the world for Jesus Christ by just going out there and sharing the gospel every chance we get. And that's being fruitful and multiplying. We're multiplying. God loves multiplication. And I struggled with that a little bit in grade school, but I learned to multiply. Physically, I learned to multiply in math, and it was really great. Today, if you're a Christian, what are you doing to bear fruit? 2 Timothy 2:2, I always like this. I call it spiritual multiplication. Paul was saying to Timothy, "The things that thou hast heard of me among many witnesses, the same commit thou to faithful men who shall be able to teach others also." That's King James Version. "The things that thou hast heard of me among many witnesses, the same commit thou to faithful men who shall be able to teach others also." And in my column in my Bible, it says spiritual multiplication. And it's part of being fruitful and multiplying and replenishing the earth with more Christians, more and more and more. God wants us all. He's not willing that any one of us should perish. Every one of you that's listening to me right now can probably reach people that I would never be able to, they wouldn't give me the time of day. I have a friend who, when he was in his younger days, he was as mean as the meanest junkyard dog. He would sooner punch you out than to even say boo to you, say hi to you. He was nasty. And he got to ride a motorcycle, and later on he got converted, and he was the kind of guy that could walk right in to the nastiest opposite of heaven's angels and have them just wilt and come to Christ. For me, they'd have probably punched me out before I got to the first word. So there are people that you can reach that I will never reach. And I have a little story. I got to tell you this while I'm on this. The guy by the name of Fred, good friend of my son who was with Youth with a Mission, he went to the hierarchy of Youth with a Mission. He said, God's calling me to go to these angels, not the heaven's angels, but the other ones. He said, he's calling me to go to their base. I forget where it was. And he said, he wants me to go tell them about Jesus. And they said, boy, that doesn't sound like a good idea. You can come out of there on a stretcher, if you go in there and tell them about Jesus. He said, but I think God wants me to do it. And he was single, didn't have a family. He said, I believe God wants me to do it. So he did. He went in. Long story short, he went in, told them about Jesus. And when he left, they were on their faces on the floor, crying out to God to save them from their sin. Many of them had sat on their mother's knee or their grandmother's knee and heard the gospel. They knew about the gospel. And when he told them, they were just being refreshed in their minds. But somewhere along the line, somebody offended them at the church that they went to. Somebody was mean to them. Something happened, and they decided to go bad. And I've heard so many stories like that. But when they come back, just on fire for the Lord. Jesus said, go into all the world, preach the gospel to every creature. And then he said, and do you know who he's saying that to? He said it to his disciples right before he sent it into heaven. But he's saying that to you and me. When we read the Bible, he's saying, you go into all the world, preach the gospel wherever any way you can do it. Tell everybody you know. And you might be the person that shares the gospel with the next, maybe Billy Graham. You don't know. You might be the Sunday school that teaches the next president of the United States. And you might be the neighbor that shares the gospel with somebody that knows somebody that knows somebody that knows somebody. And over here's a Billy Graham. But you do what you can do. You plant seeds. I've said this before. I'm going to say it again. Any one of us can pick up an apple, cut it open, and dig out all the seeds. And we can lay those seeds out. There might be 5 or 6 of them. We can count those seeds. But only God can count the apples in a seed. In one of those little seeds, he designed them to multiply, be fruitful, multiply, and replenish the earth. One little seed can produce an apple tree that can produce, let's just say it produces 10 bushels of apples each year after it gets to being fruitful. Let's just say 10 bushels. I don't know how many apples. But you take 10 bushels of apples and take all those seeds and plant them. After a while, you have millions and millions of trees. And that's the way we can multiply spiritually. We can tell one other person about Jesus, and that's like planting an apple seed, because that one person can go share with 10 more people, and they become disciples. He said, make disciples of all nations. He didn't say just get them converted. He said, make disciples. So, this is really wonderful. He also said, these signs will follow them that believe. It says, these signs shall follow those that believe. Now, if you're a believer, listen to this. He said, these signs will follow those that believe. In my name, Jesus is saying this, shall. This is King James, by the way. In my name shall they cast out devils. Are you casting out devils today as a Christian? Or when you sense in your spirit that somebody has a devil, are you willing to cast it out? You shall do this if you're a believer. You'll speak with new tongues. If you've been going to church all your life, and I've seen it a lot in Pentecostal circles, they go through the whole life seeking the baptism of the Holy Spirit and they never get it. God isn't going to force your mouth open and make your tongue flap up and down, do a bunch of stuff. You have to open your mouth and start making syllables, and the Spirit of the Lord will come on you and you'll start speaking. And so they'll take up serpents. If they drink any deadly thing, it shall not hurt them. They shall lay hands on the sick and they shall recover. These are the words of Jesus. Are you a believer? Are these signs following you? Why or why not? And you say, well, I don't know how. Well, learn how. There are places you can go and learn how to do all these things, how to get closer to the Lord, and how to have the Spirit of the Lord on your life. I have another whole page yet, but my time's up. I guess I need to have something, a closing thought. I guess my closing thought is Matthew 10, verse 7 and 8. Jesus said to his disciples, "Go to the lost house of Israel, and tell them the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Heal the sick, cleanse the lepers, raise the dead, cast out devils. Freely you have received, freely give." This is not a suggestion. This is a command. So my last thought is, I'll go do it. God bless you all. I love you.